Hello and welcome to the Dynaudio YouTube channel. Today I'm at Signals Hi-Fi in one of their demo rooms to talk about two very different but similarly priced floor standing loudspeakers. Let's have a look at the first pair, which are from Acoustics. Let's have a closer look. So this is the first pair of loudspeakers we're going to look at. This is the Acoustics Concept 50 with some very interesting technologies. The cabinet has a material called gel core, which is essentially like having a cavity wall with, instead of insulation being in there or air, it's filled with this kind of gel, which makes the cabinets incredibly inert. There's point-to-point bracing inside the cabinet. Again, it's just reducing any cabinet resonance. This tweeter is hermetically sealed and fully mechanically isolated from this aluminium baffle. Two 5-inch drivers firing above and below the HF unit. So you've got a really clever concept here, hence Concept 50. The other nice thing, you don't need to worry about buying any isolation feet because they already come with them. Isolation helps reduce any seismic activity, is the way it's normally put. But what I think it does is it helps stop the speaker interacting with the floor in a negative way, or the floor interacting with the speaker in a negative way. So let's have a listen to these, then we'll bring out the second pair and we'll talk about the differences in spec, tonal characteristics, and all the other good stuff. Let's have a listen to these. Okay, so I'm going to play a piece of music on the Acoustics Concept 50s. I will play the same piece of music on the next pair of loudspeakers that we're going to look at. But what you probably won't be able to pick up on this recording is how high and how wide and deep these speakers throw the soundstage. The bass is absolutely incredible. So I'll play this track. Hopefully some of it will come across on the recording, and then we'll move over to the next pair of speakers. Enjoy this.
Could it be you calling me down? My foolish heart turns at the stars. All that I have is all that you see. You don't need nobody else, and you're putting this all on me. Forget there's no way to love. Just open your eyes. Just hold out your hand and place it to mine. Forever it's you, forever it's me. You don't need nobody else, it's all yours, but you fail to see. It's all yours. It's all yours. It's all yours. You don't need nobody else, because all that you need is me. You give to me body and soul, bleeding between the cracks in the wall. So we have no time, time's all we need. You don't need nobody else, and I know that you're so worthy. See, you never come when I call, and you never run.
Okay, so the first and most obvious thing to me is a really clean, uncolored, very tight and controlled sound. The low frequencies on these speakers are incredibly deep. For a speaker that doesn't look particularly big, its scale and weight in the bass is very impressive. The mid-range is clean and very clear and uncolored. The HF is very detailed, quite crisp, and in no way harsh. It's slightly rolled off in my opinion, but gives a very nice tonal balance to these quite warm sounding loudspeakers. You can play these very loud and they are not offensive in any way. A real joy to listen to, but my personal The thing I really rate about these is the depth and power in the low frequencies. It's very impressive for what are fairly small floor standing loudspeakers. They certainly sound a lot bigger. My impressions of soundstage, put the speakers up here somewhere. That's the height of the soundstage that they present. So they sound far bigger than they actually are. Very impressive loudspeakers. Let's have a look at the second pair and do a comparison. Okay, we've switched over loudspeakers, and before we talk about these, I just want to do my pretty typical knuckle test. So you can definitely detect an audible difference in the cabinet rigidity. How that affects the sound, well, we'll find out in a minute. Let's have a talk about these. So these are the Dynaudio Emit 50s. A few months ago, I did a review here on the Dynaudio Emit 10s and the 20s, and these are their bigger brothers. So a true three-way design. You've got two bass units, a dedicated mid unit, and a silk soft dome tweeter. They're ESO-tar tweeter, just like the rest of the range has, and it's a dribbled down technology from their higher end model, so we know that's going to be a very good tweeter. I've heard it before on the smaller models and it is exceptionally good. So let's have a listen to these and see how they compare. First and most obvious thing is the Dynaudio Emit 50s are considerably larger than the Q Acoustic Concept 50s. How that will affect the sound staging in the room, being a larger speaker, well, we're about to find out. Let's play the same sound clip that we did on the earlier speakers and see if we can hear any difference.
Could it be you calling me down? My foolish heart turns at the stars. All that I am is all that you see. You don't need nobody else, and you're putting this all on me. Forget now, there's no greater love. Just open your eyes. Just hold out your hand and place it to mine. Forever it's you, forever it's me. You don't need nobody else. It's all yours, but you fail to see. It's all yours. It's all yours. It's all yours. You don't need nobody else, because all that you need is me. You give to me body and soul, reading between the cracks in the wall. So we have no time, time's all we need. You don't need nobody else, and I know that you still believe. See, you never come wrong when I call, and you never run when I trip and fall. I lie awake.
So I'm not sure how this will come over on the sound clip, but what I'm hearing is a very different sounding loudspeaker. Dynaudio, in my opinion, are often known for having tremendous amounts of bass. In my opinion, the Q Acoustics actually sound like they have more bass, a softer, deeper, low frequency response that probably favours somebody who really likes bassy music. The fact that these are a true three-way design means that some of the signals, some of the frequency range obviously has a dedicated driver, which in my opinion does give them a slightly cleaner sound. That HF unit is incredibly good on, even on the small ones that I heard here some 9 months ago. The HF unit is fantastic. It's very crisp, very clean, very detailed, and not fatiguing in any way. The mid-range unit, being a dedicated mid-range unit, does mean her voice is just a little bit more forward. And I didn't find that negative in any way. It didn't make me sort of engage into her voice just a little bit more. But what I found the biggest difference was in the bass. I was shocked that actually these quite large speakers don't sound like they have as much LF as the smaller Q Acoustics. But in all honesty, they've got bags of bass, more than enough for me. I would be very happy with that level of low frequency response. Depending on styles of music, you may find the Q Acoustics just a bit too bassy, potentially if you're not listening to something with that kind of impact that you want. So if you're listening to classical music, maybe you'd find the Q Acoustics a tad unrealistic in their bass response, but it's not bad in any way at all. These, very pleasant to listen to. I think these would possibly cater for a wider variety of music. The Q Acoustics certainly suit, in my opinion, that more modern sound. So if I was to play something like Massive Attack or Deadmau5, any of the dance tracks that I really like, I think the Q Acoustics would actually really impress me. Obviously, being different types of speakers, they have different crossover points, different frequency ranges. They will perform differently in each room. So a good example of that, I had to pull these further forward away from the rear wall to get the same kind of bass response, in all honesty. So these do require a slightly larger room, in my opinion, being a larger speaker. The Q Acoustics may be slightly more preferable to various different rooms. Also, those isolation wobbly feet, they do, in my opinion, make a massive difference. That just has less effect on the room in the bass response. So that's potentially another reason that the Q Acoustics had that lovely bass. I wonder what these would sound like if we tried some ISO Acoustics Gaia feet. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up in a minute. We'll just show a few more sound clips, and I'll do a A-B comparison going right through between the Q Acoustics to the Dynaudio speakers. So what did I think of the differences between the Q Acoustics Concept 50 and the Dynaudio Emit 50? Both very similarly priced speakers. They're both floor standers, but slightly different designs. Whenever you have a loudspeaker with dedicated drive units, it does offer a very different tonal characteristics, some would say better. My personal preference for many years has always been a two-way stand mount speaker. I'm very used to that sound, and although you get limited low end, I'm quite happy to live with that for the wonderful tonal balance you get between a two-way stand mount speaker. However, being here today and listening to two floor standing speakers, I realised, yes, there is quite a lot of enjoyment to be had from a floor standing speaker that can provide you with some serious low end. You do realise at times that some of these lower registers are very important and do alter the experience of listening to music. Something like my Falcon Acoustics LS35As, which never bothered me that they were missing the lower octaves. If you switch from them to these, you would suddenly be aware, yes, there's a huge amount of information really missing. So, two floor standers, two similarly priced speakers, two slightly different designs. The overall characteristic differences between the two, I will try and explain. The Q Acoustics having less driver interaction, so you've got two mid-bass units going to an HF unit rather than two bass units, a mid-range unit, and then an HF unit in the Dynaudios, means there's less going on between the drivers, which could potentially offer a more seamless integration between the units. That presentation on the Q Acoustics was very, very nice. I liked how they portrayed an enormous soundstage for such, to be honest with you, quite small stand mount speakers. The HF was very, very clean, very clear, crisp, and in no way fatiguing. I enjoyed listening to those. However, when we switch to the Dynaudios, which have far more drivers and dedicated drive units for their frequency responses, it did just initially make them sound a little bit leaner and a little bit more forward in the mid-range presentation. But after my ears had time to adjust to that, I soon realised actually that was just a totally different tonal presentation, that once you'd allowed yourself to get used to that and acclimatise, so to speak, to the different loudspeakers, I actually enjoyed both of them, but for slightly different reasons. The Q Acoustics, the main reason I enjoyed them was I was shocked at how good they sounded for their size. That means that if you were in slightly more limited living conditions, or your music room wasn't massive, or basically you just didn't want enormous loudspeakers, but wanted a load of bass potential and speakers that will really live well in most rooms, you can run them closer to the walls. They are an excellent choice, a fantastic sounding, very stylistic, modern looking and sounding loudspeakers. The Dynaudios being bigger, needing a little bit more room to breathe, you had to bring them away from the rear wall. Their tonal characteristics, in my opinion, probably sounded just a little bit more grown up to me. I think that's down to the separate drive units just giving you a more precise presentation of each instrument or tonal qualities throughout the frequency range. In terms of sound staging, I think the Q Acoustics probably had it, to be honest with you. Being smaller and narrower, they just gave you slightly better illusion, I think. But in terms of overall bass power, probably actually not a lot in it. Both speakers can produce an enormous amount of low frequency response in a way that's very enjoyable. Mid-range, I've got to give that to the Dynaudios, and HF, I've got to give that to the Dynaudios as well. They're just a little bit, they're able to extract just a little bit more from the recording, in my opinion. Both of which are phenomenal sounding loudspeakers, and both of which would really come down to personal taste. I think, in a nutshell, they're both exceptionally good. So, value for money, £2,000, floor standing, incredibly impressive speakers. The choice would be down to the individual. Take care, guys. I'll catch up with you soon.